My entire life, goals, ambitions, and desires are centered around one major thing: technology. Media and machines that let us thrive off of information and ease of living. Monuments to our own intelligence and persistence as human beings. The call of the machine is a beautiful one. The speaker shares its sounds, the keyboard clacks and allows me to write all of this, and the mouse clicks and lets me put it all together in one video. Technology has been the epicenter of my life for God knows how long. Yet it also seems to be humanity's biggest hurdle. Agency is stripped away from the average consumer in lieu of accelerated, yet sloppy attempts at streamlining information. Art becomes bastardized and commodified into inoffensive, congealed mush in an effort to comfort the incurious. The world loses shape every single time one of these tools is used in such a frustratingly selfish manner. Oceans sink into themselves, trees fall one by one, nature is left bare in an attempt to commodify everything and anything we can for our technical pursuits. Gone is the pursuit of self-expression through mainstream means, simplified down to brand appeal and hypermonetization. Such gaudy attempts at reaching one's own aesthetic pleasures are left to the people with money to burn, the ones who never need to worry about keeping enough money to leave the lights on. These individuals will climb over each other in order to pursue such control over the world, calling upon like-minded bloodletters to join up as sellswords for a quick buck. Said sellswords will fight for a spot in the status quo, not for themselves, but for tomorrow's leader, who will happily cast their trigger-happy asses to the side. Style is not permanent, but is the only means by which these guns for hire can keep themselves occupied, and how the world's leaders can master a facade of order through chaos. Luxury is only afforded to those who cannot just fight for it, but fight alongside a cyclical war appended by the embarrassing rhetoric of its generals and highest bidders. The world has been sold. The men who own it no longer live. The soul of these men is the combat that carries on within the steel chassis of an armored core. I have been deeply interested in Mecha for a while now. There is a familiar mechanical structure to the hobby that I can liken to those of motor vehicles and firearms. Yet, there's quite a difference between the likes of those and Mecha. Mechs aren't real. Mechs are a storytelling vessel meant to inform genre geeks of the identity of fictional nations, characters, and ideals, oftentimes abstracted in order to get their point across. The closest thing to a traditional Japanese mecha show I've ever watched is Gainax's Fully Coolly, a show, funnily enough, developed after the post-mecha blues of Neon Genesis Evangelion. One thing leads to another, Gainax can't help themselves, and what do you know, Naoto's getting swallowed up by the TV-headed robot, swearing to beat away at all of Mabusa's oddities and immaturities. If you count the Transformers franchise as mecha, the faces the series has taken up, and off, are numerous depending on authorial intent, licensees, and market desires. If kids are fucking with giant gorillas, then by God, that robot's going to turn into a giant gorilla. Video games are such an interesting place to explore mechanical artistry in. Preservation efforts, both official and unofficial, make particularly older games easy to get your hands on. The power fantasy of fictitious, expensive thrills has never looked so palatable. Armored Core is one such beauty in the line of many of FromSoftware's powerhouse franchises. While I have next to null knowledge on mecha media outside failing to build a Zaku 2 figure, I put so much time into Fires of Rubicon when it came out. I was coasting along a failing relationship, I'd been getting into awful scuffles with some friends due to general immaturities, and I'd been struggling to find work. Yet I did have some solace in the fact that I did have people around me that just asked, yo, do you want to play some fucking Armored Core? That outlet eventually faded over time, as all good things do. And let me just say, grass wasn't greener on the other side for sure. My relationship imploded, I got stuck with a fast food job with awful employers, and my desire to create and engage with the things I loved was absolutely decimated. It wasn't until after quitting said job where I found some more ambition in my own writing and creative output. I did play Armored Core 4 later on after all of that, but it was such a flash in the pan because of its incredibly short length, but we'll see how I feel about that in the future, whenever the time comes. Let it be clear that I am not a seasoned mecha vet. I'm not going to understand the ins and outs of everything placed in front of me at this given moment, unlike the other things I cover here, mostly. FromSoftware does hold a particular and special place in my heart, and I thought I'd use their franchise as a jumping off point to get into a hobby I've been meaning to get myself into. Maybe then I'll actually finish that Zaku model kit. there's anything that strikes me about Armored Core's opening hour, outside of the abrupt tutorialization, is that the game is a particular flavor of mean and cruel that FromSoftware would never really broach again outside of some instances in their development these days. Funds are tied to your completion of a level, kinetic ammo expended, and repairs required, and sometimes even delicate objectives that can tank your credit score into the negative if something goes awry. The odds are constantly stacked against the player. The starting rifle is absolute garbage, but the sword is better. Yet what difference does that make if you can't consistently avoid damage? The only odd that manages to even itself early on is the new shopping system, in which a player can trade items they don't use for the same credits as a new purchase. There's no such thing as depreciation in the Raven's Nest, the hub for all Raven pilots. All supply is met with equal demand constantly, urging players to experiment not just with weaponry and armor, but also learn their own economic choke points. Armored Core revolves around jobs posted on a primitive internet infrastructure, allowing companies, cops, and cores an opportunity to hire anyone with a big enough gun to right whatever wrongs committed in the Beehive cities or above. Yet, this goes both ways, as sharp ravens can actively manipulate the market in their favor, taking jobs from one corporation that lead to another corporation asking them to clean up their mess from before, doubling their funds to their own vanity and necessary upgrades. When a new raven figures out their way around their core's controls, all they need to worry about is the economy now. No one Raven is going to have the same initial build, meaning that certain builds are going to be an uphill battle at different points in the game. I chose to build a heavyweight mech for my first playthrough. I named it Warbler, and I used high-impact laser weaponry because I knew from my time playing Armored Core 4 that energy weapon ammo is completely free, as it's harnessed from your generator itself. Yet the buy-in is extremely costly, becoming a burden in the mid-game as you'll almost be flat broke after every mission with all of the optimal parts you need to make this build fully work. My second playthrough, the one I recorded for this video, I built a middleweight laser gunner named Blue Jay, and balancing funds was so much easier this time around. The problem here was I needed to balance weight constantly, especially when I found the Kurosawa rifle earlier than I did with Warbler. If I wanted efficient speed, I'd need to sacrifice the safety net of a backup weapon, and experiment with legs I never did with Warbler. My partner played this alongside me, and her experiences with lightweight reverse joint building was incredibly min-max focused. She spent so much time in menus trying to balance a build around her favorite machine guns and back-mounted missile launchers without ever hitting the weight limit. Customization is deep and endless within this game, and for a first attempt, I'm absolutely fucking rocked. Movement tropes, damage types, build crafting, and playstyle depth is fully realized here in a way that I don't see most first installments nail. Even though I was stubborn with changing Warbler's legs until Project Phantasma's endgame, I ended up being reminded that quadruped legs allow a player to float at speeds relative to a dual-legged side boost while also allowing back weapon usage at all times. Caterpillar builds, the one where you use the tank treads, seemed useless to me at first, but running one in Master of Arena's forced Caterpillar bracket helped me realize that those guys cannot be stun-locked typically, trading out speed for smooth omni movement and poise. Build variety, excessive vanity, and constant capital reward is the day-to-day life of a Raven. Playing an arduous three-way tug-of-war with the seedy underbelly of the Raven's Nest on top of shady corporations with blatant motives, the life of a Raven isn't to question. It is to get enough to live longer, to afford more luxury, to touch parts of the world and beyond that no one else could be able to. This is reflected so well in the visual language of the game, as the hive cities are nothing more than simple, utilitarian blocks of steel and pavement that exist only for efficiency. The average layman of cities like Isaac and Zam are absolutely neglected in the crossfire, with corporations like Chrome paying top dollar for destruction of such city blocks that you may have tried to once protect during an easy job. City guards post requests on the net, as they are trained to protect capital, not the everyman. Production facilities are not much better, and whatever land above you are tasked with visiting is littered with new industrial structures besmirching whatever beauty was attempting to exist in this world. The rat race is what makes Armored Core so compelling as a narrative. Monotony and repetition flood this game as if you were working a job for each of these companies and institutions. Every time Murakumo Millennium promises that they aren't overextending their military power for a fearful preemptive strike, you shut up, suit up, and go on your merry way for credits. And if you don't, the company will simply hire somebody else, leaving you to clean up the scraps or miss out on both wreaking havoc and then cleaning up after yourself for extra profit. The idea of existing as a neutral entity in Generation 1 is absolutely alien. Armored Core posits that if you want the most from the game, to be able to customize, to be able to fight onto the next monotonous day, to even be able to afford the luxury of living in a world so far gone, you must climb your way up the ladder. There are many other ravens scattered amongst the world. The mission that Chrome sends you on to destroy an urban center in Gaul City ends with an encounter with a Valkyrie, the core of the Raven Lovazy. It is a terrifying moment, as this will most likely be most first-timers' attempts at fighting another Raven. If you choose to evade her, you can until the mission ends, or you can kill her. Either action results in you climbing further up an actual leaderboard you can view in the Raven's Nest. You keep climbing over the other Ravens, over the heavily armored Kamui, over the godly constructs of Balthazar and Wolf, and finally, over Lovazy herself, planting yourself in second place. Driving yourself through the heart of the Raven's Nest, taking on every job you can no matter what you do, you still arrive at the same end on each playthrough. I would tend to choose the requests of Murakumo Millennium, an industry titan in the Hives. Their missions were typically easier and shorter, on top of their emails and instructions scanning as hilariously, predictably, campy. Murakumo peppers their prose with blissful arrogance and accusations of savagery upon their competition, claiming to be the safeguards of the future, all while having a massive spaceport that houses a laser constantly pointing at the Earth. We actually learn that through the Chrome path, and while Chrome fancies themselves the arbiters of peace through technological innovation, they constantly intermingle with awful automation and bioweapon technology. Within every Raven's journey, these two giants will clash, and it will lead to absolutely nothing but death and destruction shared between the two, with the world being demonstrably worse off with both of them in the picture. In my initial playthrough, Chrome lost against Murakumo Millennium, as their greater tech overpowers them. Murakumo uses this as an opportunity to destabilize Chrome at the cost of the demise of Isaac City, pushing Chrome out of the picture. Soon after, Murakumo falls due to lack of competition in the space, crumbling its own weight, leaving the Raven's Nest to mandate missions from here on out, as if it wants to lead you to something. A greater truth, perhaps. Or maybe it just wants to punish you in the most deranged and torturous way possible. The final encounters of this game are absolutely grueling for any build, as they require an explicit skill set that the game never elaborates on until this point. Platforming. This shit is incredibly mean. I think this was the only time I ever got frustrated with the campaign level in this generation. Bringing out a player before the final encounter is already cruel, but adding a platforming section that my partner and I were only able to describe as a proto-DMC3 cube room is a deliberate brush with hell. Not to mention you come face to face with 9-ball here for the first time in the generation. Twice. Approaching the final room lets the Raven in on exactly what was going on. The handler, the Raven's Nest, the missions, they were all set up by the AI terminal presented here. In the name of order, the AI sought to control through chaos, the same chaos that you perpetuated and spurred in the name of survival. It is a bleak and downright cynical ending, and is the only ending to the capital offenses created by the feeble old men of the old world mucking about with the future, out of fear of losing control. You didn't matter here. Even if you put your stock into your mech, the end goal was always chaos as a means to destabilize any sort of human nature that pre-Great Destruction civilizations and the AI saw as wrong. Enforcing order through chaos creates scared men, and those men create hardships around the world in an effort to feel big, to feel strong. The journey of this Raven comes to a screeching halt, with the AI mockingly blurting, "Go on, Raven, which one of us was ultimately right? You have the right, the duty to figure that out." Slow burn death through imperialist fears doesn't just end when the world ends. If these ideologies live on, it repeats a consistent cycle for generations to come. In a 1997 interview for the Armored Core official databook, game producer Yasuyoshi Karasawa was asked about the mission variety and structure within the first installment. He answers with, quote, "Like all other aspects of Armored Core, the missions are being done in a trial and error way, so sometimes a really cool idea becomes bad once we try it," unquote. FromSoftware's successes in the first game did prove worthy of a franchise, so not far after its release, a whopping 5 months to be exact, Armored Core Project Phantasma would be pushed out, expanding heavily on how far From could exactly push Armored Core on the first PlayStation. The limits of Sony's flagship system were honestly perfect for the brutalist appeal of the first game, but fully retreading the steps of the first game would be incredibly uncurious and unbecoming of the studio. Instead, Project Phantasma has less short-burst mission structure, and instead pivots to a more complex, level-based set-piece-driven design. While Armored Core was an exercise in bleak storytelling alongside a compelling gameplay loop, Project Phantasma kicks back a little bit, allowing Generation 1 to stretch its wings and soar for greater ambitions. There is a higher volume of unique vistas and facilities in this Raven's narrative as opposed to the repetitive lifestyle of the last. While Armored Core allows you to import cores from previous games within the same generation, I felt like it would be rather jarring to have the same Raven from a previous game take on a much sillier, laid-back role. Well, that, and Project Phantasma's status as a prequel to the base experience. I made a new, sleek, lightweight mech named Shrike, designed with the intent on pushing my build crafting skills by building an energy-efficient platform on an energy-costly frame. I tend to go heavyweight in these games, outside of Armored Core 4, of course, so doing something so uncomfortable and so out of my wheelhouse was incredibly interesting. Pushing the limits of my mech to a min-max degree felt extremely rewarding, even if the early game was much more brutal than if I had simply imported my mech like I did with Warbler before. My main thing against Project Phantasma, however, is how extremely lopsided it feels in the name of experimenting with the AC formula. Whereas Armored Core absolutely nails its thesis immediately, the new gameplay mechanics and ideas in Project Phantasma come across as either incredibly half-baked or straight up unbalanced. I'd like to point out to the arena mode for a bit to showcase my point. Project Phantasma's arena is a cute concept, and I do enjoy most of its bones. In the same interview from the official databook, Karasawa and programmer Ichi Hasegawa converse about the complexity of even attempting to make a multiplayer mode for Armored Core, and the conversation goes a little like this, with Hasegawa stating, quote, "I think we're going to hear more and more people say they want to play PvP, yeah?" Unquote. Karasawa retorts with, quote, "Well, it's not like we're going to remove versus battles or anything," unquote, to which Hasegawa replies, quote, "Most players don't even have link cables though," unquote. This seems to be the core idea of the arena, to allow players to experience the thrill of fighting another mech without feeling burdened by the lack of link cables or even people around them willing to learn the intricacies of Armored Core. The problem arises when actually playing the mode. Arenas completely replace side missions, meaning that if you're stuck on a level, you need to climb the ranks in order to secure money. Thankfully, ammo and repairs do not cost anything whatsoever here, but conversely, the arenas feel like a waste of time because once you've hit that monetary threshold, there is little that the mode offers outside of a few rewards. Not in terms of storytelling, not in terms of actual mechanical depth, or even in terms of fun. Most ACs have a little lore blurb attached to them, but these mean nothing as more times than not, core AI is not tuned to let them fight with said flair or personality. These mechs are bog standard and easy to blow through, except for the odd augmented pilots occasionally presented only to build check a player. It is easily the sloppiest part of Generation 1. Important, yes, but not engaging in the slightest. It's so separated and distant from the actual campaign experience, which I think is really quite fun in all honesty. I love Armored Core's overall desire as a franchise to branch out to different tones and world designs within their games. Project Phantasma leaves the first installment's bleak cynicism at the door, opting for a much more fantastical approach to world building. The Doomsday Organization threatens to develop the ultimate weapon, Phantasma, by using funding from their highest bidders. It's up to my spry Raven and our handler, Sumika Utrinen, to put a stop to them and our newly formed nemesis, Stinger. It is a plot straight out of a superhero story. Stinger even monologues like a sniveling arch-enemy. "When will you cease to be an annoyance?" he barks out constantly against your escapades. Simply put, the world-hopping narrative of dismantling a clandestine murder cult is pure cheese, and readjusts the relationship between mech player and character now. There is less guilt to be felt at the hands of stopping a full-blown annihilation, and it helps that Sumika as a character is a lot more lovable than Raven's Nest handler, R, and the upcoming Lana Nielsen and Elan Cubis. She's dashing, she's pretty in pink, she never wants to leave the Raven alone in unbalanced combat scenarios. She is the first and only Day 1 Strike truther, and I've got to say, I'm quite impressed. Sumika's role in Project Phantasma is the best part about the narrative, as both the base experience and the upcoming Master of Arena make you feel so alone in your endeavors. Taking Nineball's position as rival is Stinger, piloting as AC, Vixen. Stinger becomes a relative nuisance throughout the narrative, popping up only to slightly impede progress and run off like a coward when things get too hot. Phantasma is the end goal here, and this dork is going to do everything he can to get his hands on it. Well, that is if he was any good at what he did. Stinger takes no time to mow through at all in any of his attempts to stop the Ravens, even in his final appearance when he merges with the AI superweapon. What we have here is a story that lifts the weight of guilt from the first installment and lets the player loose in a playground of justice. Customization feels easier, and more options, for both returning and new cores, is always a great addition. It's just that after the smoke clears, Project Phantasma's lesser qualities end up going in one ear and out the other, at least on my end of experience. FromSoftware, however, didn't seem keen on letting go of these ideas, and I am so glad they didn't. Master of Arena is one of the most impressive releases for Sony's original console. That doesn't just go for the amount of things to do in the game, which is already absolutely Herculean, with a whopping 100 plus arena fights to get through, but rather what Master of Arena represents, not just as a standalone experience, but the core of which FromSoftware would push their community interaction and game design. Multiplayer idiosyncrasies meld into a narrative-driven single-player experience in a way that I've never seen done right, asking the player to not just dedicate their time to blasting through a campaign, but to get intimate with every little detail of this generation's attributes. Armored Core took me about 6 hours to get through on my first playthrough. Project Phantasma only asked for about 4, counting me dredging through that game's side content. Master of Arena took me a whopping 11 hours to come through all of its readily available content, not beholden to even achieving a 100% ranking, and I still wish there was more to unpack. Yet what we have in front of us today is so dense in personality and commitment to its own simple yet effective ideas. Master of Arena, very obviously, centers its narrative experience around arena combat. It is a narrative of paranoia and legacy wrapped up in a savage interpersonal revenge story. Since Master of Arena takes place after the Chrome-Murakuma War, I figured that I could import one of my previous cores and spiffy it up, under the guise in headcanon that this new Ravens salvaged one of those legends after their time was up. I chose Shrike, repainted them, min-maxed the build even further, and rechristened it Shrike Omega. Shrike's lightweight agility made it incredibly hard for enemies to even parse where I was at any given moment. This was the endgame, both in terms of narrative structure and actual mechanical demand. The top of the line was to be expected, so I strapped on some extra ammo reserves and went to town on whatever stood between me. Master of Arena's most engaging trait is that of its unique roster of boss mechs to fight in the game. I didn't expect FromSoftware to make something akin to a boss rush this early. Ravens and cores actually show their personality through combat, whether it is through careful weapon consideration or even their AI behavior. Keen players can meticulously manipulate every weakness a core has, not just down to playstyle, but even in choosing an arena to take up arms in. My favorite interaction in the story sub-arena is with this fighter named Frogman. He drives this quadruped named Lucky Hopper, a goofy-looking green fucker with missile pod arms and a pulse cannon. He is absolutely equipped for long-range combat, so when I put him in my favorite arena, the parking lot, he just loses it. He hops around, barely scratching me at all, and eventually breaks down from the light work I just put out against him. The fair thing would have been to put him in an arena like the Ocean Base or the City Block so he could even have a chance, but this was just funnier. Such other personal tales can be written from these encounters. Consider Albatross, piloted by Carson. He waits for you to expend most, if not all of your ammo in order to start mowing you down with the highest DPS machine gun in the game. It is a complete mind game. On my first playthrough of Warbler, I was able to take him down with absolute ease, but with this build, I let myself get cocky way too early and fell right into his trap, frustratingly so. My favorite encounters are within the extra arenas, against real mech builds piloted by ranking esports champions and magazine editors surrounding the Armored Core craze. These endgame arenas are unlocked by completing the initial build crafting challenges and finishing every level respectively. The fights present either some of the most elaborate, beautiful core builds this generation has ever seen, or are simple shitposts by people passionate enough about Armored Core as a platform for self-expression, but self-admittedly do not have enough mechanical nuance in making meta builds. Some of the independent editors slap together funny-looking mechs, detailed in their lore blurb that they are made out of wood, and have no fucking clue what they are doing in Bloodsport. Famitsu has their own team, Mikami, similar to the in-fiction team FOG. This is so adorable. Nearly 30 years divorced from its context, divorced from the sweeping phenomenon that was the Generation 1 hype train. This level of giving the community of what they want and not sacrificing any sort of storytelling prowess or mechanical personality is the core of what makes FromSoftware work as well as they do for me. Then, after all of the arenas are done and dusted, is a player allowed to enter the Master Arena, consisting mostly of Human Plus targets. Human Plus is a program presented in the base experience that allows pilots to ascend past their limits, at the cost of any sort of cognition, becoming slaves to the Raven's Nest. I neglected to mention Human Plus earlier on the fact that I straight up didn't know that players could even access this skill set within their own playthrough. With enough failure, or meta manipulation, players are stripped of their identities, set back to 0 in both mission progress and currency, and are given powers beyond the capability of a typical playthrough. You can use back weapons on humanoid and reverse joint builds without stopping, you are able to bypass the weight limit, and you are given access to the Moonlight's wave attack. I was shocked to learn that FromSoftware went above and beyond implementing such a feature, and learning about its mechanical intricacies opened up a brand new way of seeing some opponents. Keyword, some. The Master Arena assigns a human plus piloted core to every slot in the bracket, with some enemies equipped with unique gear that isn't seen anywhere else in the game, expecting a player to carry a human plus of their own through at least 2 games in order to even compete here. There is a large amount of trust presented here, enough to ask players to dedicate to a specific spec in order to surpass that 100% checklist, and I did it. Initially, I thought I would simply walk away from the arena knowing that while I never became the titular Master of Arena, I at least became a champion, throwing hands with the great specters of the past. My stubbornness got the best of me. I made a human plus named Swallow in order to get through the Master Arena, and I heavily min-maxed it, only to realize through that build that the weapons I decided to experiment with were more than capable on their own. I asked myself, do I really want to spend another 11 hours of my life grinding through Master of Arena just to finish one more bracket? The answer is obviously no, so I strapped new gear onto Warbler and finished the job, mowing through some of the series' most challenging targets with relative ease, but never enough to get truly stuck. I did it. I became the Master of Ravens, and was met with a lame end card and a truly discordant song that sounded like it was coming to life to ask me, what the fuck are you still doing here? Glorious. I speak so densely on the arenas because they are typically my go-to choice for progression in this game. Narrative progression is tied to 2 things. 1, the requests forwarded to you by Lana Nielsen, this game's handler, or 2, through the arena sponsorship provided by the corporation ProgTech. Achieving sub-arena entry allows a player to almost completely bypass most of Lana and Company's missions in order to engage with endgame mech bosses. What Project Phantasma lacked in substantial and intricate branching paths, Master of Arena more than doubles down on the original's design tropes while also providing a linear campaign experience for those who want that too. It is a perfect interpretation, and a perfect implementation of multiplayer thrills within a narrative sequence, even if it lacks a tangible second player. When you get a second player involved, things get heaps more interesting. I dragged my knuckles through glass in order to get a versus session with my girlfriend to work, mainly because Parsec was giving us such a rough time, but it was more than worth it. Old 90s esports titles like Quake are revered for their ease of access, whilst also having a high skill ceiling for those willing to jump that height. Armored Core, however, is a completely different beast that demands pure controller dexterity for the best control. I fucking suck at air control in Generation 1. I got obliterated so damn much because of this. However, I was great at crafting builds that just dished harsh fucking damage out, alongside wanting to experiment with things that I never thought I'd use. The Flame Shell Launcher was one such weapon, allowing me pressure and time to readjust during more disorienting moments for the both of us. And it's a weapon that I would have loved to play around with more, as damage over time is a relatively interesting option in a generation that prides itself on raw damage. It is a delicate balance for sure. Let's take a look at FromSoft's other mecha game from the same year, FrameGrid. FrameGrid is FromSoft's answer to Sega's PvP hit Virtual On. It absolutely sacrifices a linear campaign for the same arena structure. The game shipped with 10 fights in total. This wouldn't be so rough if the fights included weren't absolutely sleepy and bafflingly boring. The AI is nothing more than a punching bag most of the time, and the game never expects any sort of mechanical heavy lifting on your part. FrameGrid's lack of understanding on what makes the arena combat in these games so interesting, and its unbecoming desire to completely strip away any sort of cute multiplayer to single-player idiosyncrasies in favor of blunt yet bland tower fighter structure drowns it in a sea of intriguing design present in Master of Arena. In fact, there is one idiosyncrasy here that FromSoftware really attaches themselves to, and that is farming. You either throw yourself at risky PvP fights or farm the same monotonous arena fights over and over again for a chance to build a part. This process can either take anywhere from 40 minutes to the equivalent time it takes to beat the campaign a solid 5 times. I kid you not, by the time my partner had already built one medium weight cavalier and was struggling to build a lightweight, I had already built 3, one for each weight class. It is baffling that this is even a problem, considering how right Generation 1 got it, how basic progression leads to the serotonin rush of building such monolithic vehicles to stack against other like-minded enthusiasts. Master of Arena feels right. It feels like the ultimate experimentation for a game in a genre like this, to expand further on that self-expressive vibe these games shoot for, while also not shying away from the first installment's darker and meaner moments. For every joke fight, there's a couple more fights that will have you ripping your hair out either trying to counterbuild or outmaneuver them. For every silly threat that Lana sends your way if you disobey her, there lies the uncomfortable truth that people in programs like Lana and Hustler 1 see humanity as cattle that need to be either sedated or culled given the circumstances. FromSoftware understands self-expression fundamentally, not as a tool for the rich and mighty to flaunt their power, but as for the layman or the passionate to have an outlet to look forward to in a crushing and devastating world. For how anachronistic the game's narrative can be sometimes, especially if one mission positing Chrome's existence post the Battle of Isaac City, it still manages to hit its main idea on the head. One character from the extra arena stood out to me as deeply profound, one crafted off of tournament winner Kaine Shiotsu's Mecha, Automation Elaine. The character description reads, believes AC creation is an art form. I absolutely agree with this sentiment. Opening myself up to different art forms, whether it is writing, online creation, digital mecha, or the real plastic deal, mecha is slowly becoming a prominent part of my life, and not one I really want to give up anytime soon. This art form is incredibly inspirational, and it begs the question, why was Generation 2 like that? On paper, Armored Core 2 should work on almost all levels for me. The cycles of violence repeating themselves in the exact same way as the first game, the rebalancing of toolkits and weaponry to give a fresh experience, the Y2K angle of art direction are all incredibly appealing concepts to me as a fan of Generation 1. For the most part, I do think these things work in a vacuum separated from Generation 1, yet it's the game's insistence on trying to tie itself to the previous narratives that make it a really frustrating affair. Armored Core 2 has been one of the most challenging games that I have written about on this channel because for every brilliant push forward in its gameplay and aesthetic desires, there are a few stumbles where there shouldn't be any. For instance, considering how much this game takes from Generation 1, I'm absolutely surprised that the idea of even balancing laser weapons was thrown out of the window. These energy weapons absolutely blow, forcing me off of one of my favorite weapon types for so long until the endgame. It absolutely sucks when a follow-up to an ARPG-styled system absolutely neglects what can make a fan fall deeply in love with their gameplay loops. I was incredibly frustrated, as I wanted to carry my first mech's design tropes into the second one of my new mech, Mallard. It would have been impossible for me to enjoy Armored Core 2 the same way I enjoyed Armored Core, so if that were to be the case, then are the alternatives, both new and old, better than what laser weapons had offered me in the original? The answer is absolutely yes. I was able to let go of those feelings mainly because the greater weapon roster is absolutely amazing. Mechanically, all of this revolves around a new status effect called Heat. If you proc enough heat on an enemy, they burn up over time, eating away at their armor and allowing for moments of extreme pressure. This is exactly what I wanted from the original game's flame systems, and the fact that most shell-based weapons can generate an insane amount of heat is ultimately what made me switch from the rather gimped laser selection. Even within Armored Core 2's more diverse weapon sandbox, arenas challenged what I was comfortable with in terms of combat. There is no more parking lot arena. Most arenas are entirely open space with little to no cover, if there is cover, it is extremely fragile. Before I was even able to deal a consistent amount of damage with a shell-based gun, I needed to balance my mech around the stricter movement requirements. By the time my second playthrough rolled around, I was an absolute master of what the game wanted in terms of air control, free aim, and build crafting. The more fun weapons in my eyes were the rebalanced flamethrower and handguns. Handguns gave me an opportunity to dispense heat damage at a low ammo cost on top of freeing up enough weight for me to put devastating back weapons on. The flamethrower is a complete shakeup of everything I knew about Armored Core's combat up to this point, as it is a free aim weapon, expecting you to get comfortable with purely dexterity-driven, close-range free aim, and rewarding you with intense damage not typically seen until endgame level weapons. Armored Core 2's early game is capital H hard, expecting a level of build crafting only a Gen 1 veteran would understand right off rip. Strung, the mentor raven that takes you under his wing for the first mission, states that life on Mars will not be anything like our life on Earth, less referring to any storytelling context, but seemingly directing himself towards the actual player. FromSoftware wants you to know that this isn't the same old Armored Core. It is going to be crueler, it's going to be even harder to manage. It's easy to mistake Armored Core 2's cruelty as genuinely unfair, but the leeway the game gives you by allowing players to experiment at a null monetary risk using the arena right off rip is trusting in a way that FromSoftware typically is. The arena presented here is still of Master of Arenas quality, even down to the excessive personality given to every aspect of it. The drum and bass, the futurism-inspired locales, and the active attention to detail and challenger behavior is about as compelling as the original generation's attempts to bridge the gap between playing competitively within a single-player environment. These guys taunt you in your emails. They have rivalries, relationship dynamics amongst themselves, leading to some pretty hilarious moments, like the two fighters who dominate the middle of the rankings board together, but when separated are absolutely useless. Mars' Ninebreaker, the title assigned to the highest ranker in the arena, even emails you saying that his only goal in life is to, no joke, prevent you from reaching the top. The dexterous prowess required to even make it to that point is so much more demanding than anything the original generation had to throw at you outside of the Master Arena. The revised Project Phantasma styled approach to bouncing around the two modes of play feels at home with Armored Core 2's more erratic and difficult mission design. The irony of Armored Core 2's slick core design, snappy gunplay, and squeaky clean iconography are the rough edges permeating from every bleak story beat, both within the context of the world built between generations and some of the meta-contextual issues that I take with the second generation as a whole. Through gameplay, I think this thesis statement holds up well. The gorgeous computer-esque visuals of Martian infrastructure beat oppressively against harsh drum and bass tracks, and Martian nature is corrupted to an even sadder extreme than Earth's extinction. Mars was never meant to look like this. Like Earth, there isn't anything noticeably Martian in the game's depiction of planetside combat, because it was diluted to serve humanity's needs. The vistas and locales are traditionally pretty, but it's off-putting to see a version of Mars that has not a trace of its own visual identity intact. It serves Generation 1 well to be able to see a planet and bloody industry thrive alongside Armored Cores finally. It serves Generation 2 well to have the conglomerate's greed unbecome anything sacred about this new planet. The only thing relatively Martian that exists are bioweapons, a direct callback to Generation 1's warrior bugs. Disorder units are much more mysterious and numerous. Zeomatrix, a company present within the game, unearthed the bioweapons and began to test on them. They are so close to actual core architecture, down to their sleek and towering designs. What does this say about ancient Martians? Does it mean at one point Martians fought their own wars against each other, that they had to protect themselves against a threat like Earth before eventually succumbing to time? Whatever it is, of course, Zeo uses them for their own gain. Armored Core 2's corporate dynamic is even messier than the first games. The Earth government doesn't even try to hide their manipulation of corporations to their own benefits, partnering with Martian subsidiaries like Belina to stake a claim in Martian real estate. Zeomatrix holds superiority on Mars, much to the dismay of Earth's strongest conglomerate, Emerald. Attempts to destabilize each other are met with third and fourth party intervention by Belina and, if a Raven chooses to, themselves. Depending on the missions a Raven does, the more sponsored parts flood their shop, attempting to bridge loyalty through bribery. Loyalty, however, is not a Raven's strong suit, and this mechanically effectively bolsters Generation 1's dynamic of fucking everyone over to come out on top. Of course, the game has every right to fuck you over too. Time doesn't operate on a similar scale in gameplay to the first installment anymore. You only have a limited number of sorties until the story pushes itself into another act. This was absolutely heartbreaking to learn in my playthrough with Grackle, because it meant that I had locked myself out of my favorite gun a little bit longer than I was comfortable with. The ZWHG-111 handgun would not show up in stores early because I didn't do enough Zeomatrix missions before the act switch. Bummer. Manipulating loyalty goes both ways, and pressuring a player into different routes of completion is a compelling enough solution to figuring out build crafting as a means to move the story forward. Yet, for every impressive decision Armored Core 2 makes within its gameplay, there are still some that leave me absolutely baffled. I think the flagship mechanic I can point to for my exact problems with this game is the hacking mechanic. Depending on the head you purchase, you have an assigned hacking value attached to it, making certain heads seemingly more valuable in places than others, not unlike the radar system. What does hacking do, though? Well, it opens secret doors otherwise inaccessible to those with a hacking value under 4. How many of these doors are there? 2. There are 2 doors in this game that require this mechanic. So at that point, why the hell weren't these just breakable doors? This kind of mechanical lackadaisy persists throughout the Generation 2 experience, to much more baffling and worse extremes. If we take Frame Grid as an extension of Generation 2's design goals, and I am because these were the same development teams, the goal was to reinvent the wheel while also staying close to what made the original installments in Virtual On and Armored Core so compelling. This goal is incredibly confusing on principle and is completely misguided by FromSoftware's own attempts on interjecting rough friction points into the experience. Armored Core 2, at some points, feels like a first draft, which shouldn't really be the case whenever the other 3 installments already exist to smooth out these growing pains. In an attempt to branch away from older gameplay tropes and iconography while blending the Generation 1 narrative within the context of Generation 2, FromSoftware attempts to have their cake and eat it. This results in one of the most blindsiding and pretentious moments from the studio I have ever seen. The main villain of the game, Leos Klein, is a part of the Frighteners, a collective of top-tier ravens requested by the government to bring order to Mars. The player feels their ire at almost every corner of the second act. Their presence is, well, frightening and off-putting. Jobs do not feel safe anymore, and it brings a nice level of tension to the core gameplay loop. The status quo changes during the third act, wherein Klein and the Frighteners enact a coup d'etat against the Earth government in Belina, promising a free nation for ravens to do as they please, sort of equivalent to the later depiction of the MSF in Metal Gear Solid. This change in the status quo isn't brought about by choice. Whether Klein betrays the government or not is not up to the player's input, yet the endgame is incredibly jarring because of the choice presented to the player beforehand. If things are still so bad in the shared world of Generation 1 and 2, isn't it to be surmised that seeing a change of some sort might be interesting or forward-moving for the narrative? I've withheld one piece of critical information about Klein up to this point. Klein is Earth's Ninebreaker. At first, I kind of wanted to brush this off as there might have been evidence that this couldn't have been the same Ninebreaker from Master of Arena, from my own save. Yet, there was evidence that this might be the case. I honestly might be a little pissed off about that. Armored Core has been bleak before, but it has never been as selfish metatextually to divorce a player from their own original creation and intention. Sure, there is a novelization of Master of Arena that puts a fixed identity on the main character, but that's to ground readers to a fixed narrative, which is completely fine and fits the context of an adaptation. But this is way too much from a series that prides itself on its abilities to connect players through creativity. Fixing an identity to a previous player character betrays the core idea of why the series is so compelling to me, and the outcome just straight up isn't all that interesting. I wonder if some parts of FromSoftware feel this way too, as the handler, Nell Alter, even states frustration at the stagnation of the world around her, saying that while Leos wasn't right in the ways he went about it, a free state for ravens would have at least brought some sort of change. It's not to say that I would agree with Leos if I were personally placed in my raven's shoes, fuck no, but I share a sort of metacontextual frustration with Nell. Why weren't things allowed to change? Even if it were for the worse, it makes sense to look forward than to bastardize a core part of your own series' identity. Watching the world dissolve into clandestine chaos a la MSF and Mother Base would have been a better alternative to what this was supposed to be. I can't help but theorize on what the alternative could have been, because what we ended up getting afterward was so much worse. I want to start off this section by saying that playing a bad FromSoftware game is a spiritually destabilizing experience. Armored Core 2: Another Age is the first title from the studio that I outright hate. I see fervor slung by fans of Soulsborne all the time about which title is the best, and which titles they perceive as worthless, and it is a conversation that I have never been able to wrap my head around. None of FromSoftware games are genuinely worthless, even my lesser favored ones, like Armored Core 2 and Project Phantasma. They are worthwhile in the questions that they ask and the problems they ask a player to solve. Another Age is the only video game I have ever played that I genuinely think could have been an email and I would not have missed a thing. I knew that Another Age was going to be a sore point the moment I booted into the first mission, but I didn't understand how emblematic of the experience that introductory level was to the rest of the experience. You are thrown into small arenas and are tasked with throwaway objectives, with no narrative whatsoever to back it up. Rinse repeat for about 70% of the game's runtime. There is not much to say about that 70%. For a majority of this game, you are left eating Armored Core 2's table scraps, with an aesthetic identity unbefitting of both FromSoftware and the standards of Armored Core. I don't know why Another Age chooses to go back to Earth. Is it really to rub into you that nothing has changed in the greater narrative? Ravens wake up, do work, and nothing else because of the events on Mars? That could already be inferred, but Another Age really insists on its weak reasons for its existence. I hear talks in the community about how this is supposed to be a game about the average day in the life of a Raven, but honestly, that is some of the biggest cope I have ever heard said about a video game. The entire series is already the day in the life of a Raven. Placing the game on Earth only weakens the narrative link between both generations because there is nothing of value here anymore, retreading old ground in the most monotonous way possible. The environments look out of place against Armored Core 2's greater visual fidelity. Armored Core's utilitarianism worked because of its technical limitations placed on the set dressing. Another Age fundamentally misunderstands that, making for some of FromSoftware's ugliest attempts at art. At the very least, the brand new locales of Earth look heaps better, even though there are rarely ever inspiring vistas or level designs. It is the same thing we have been experiencing for 5 games now. You'd figure FromSoftware would want to take the time to experiment more if we were just throwing shit at the wall. To give credit where it is due, there is still some stuff here in the way of experimentation. Independent of the base campaign, there are multiplayer missions where players compete against each other in order to complete a contract. Competing for a paycheck with a rival player seems compelling on the surface, but those missions are incredibly bare-bones reskins of either single-player content or previous missions on the multiplayer roster. As far as I'm able to tell, there are things here that would be built upon in Armored Core 3, such as overboost overheating your generator, but it also gets the original intended balance of Armored Core 2. Overboost just does not feel fun in this generation anymore. I don't have any doubts that this is balanced better in Generation 3, but it is a severe misstep here and serves to show that, at best, Another Age is simply developmental cannon fodder. The other 30% of the Another Age experience is split between 2 ways. It is 25% of missions that aren't particularly inspired but have something about them that sticks out as relatively difficult, alongside some incredibly underbaked boss encounters, and another 5% of genuinely interesting forward thinking within the level design. I want to take a moment and talk about those few levels I ended up liking because I need some positivity in this section. I absolutely adored the levels that test your knowledge on flight and generator management. The vistas here are breathtaking and are scaled beautifully. Miles and miles of canyon terrain in between you and your objective, the atmosphere is absolutely smothering. My favorite one happens to be where you destroy the 4 airplanes in quick succession by free-falling onto each one individually. This is the highest a Raven has flown within Earth's own atmosphere, and the amount of mechanical trust allotted to the player is helpful in digesting how terrible the rest of the game is at maintaining that bond. There is one boss towards the end of the game, against one of the biggest MTs in the series up to this point. It reminded me of Air Combat's final boss, where defensive maneuver is paramount to allow yourself offensive pressure. Hell, even Nineball is here, for some reason beyond me, and he is easily the best core fight in the game. There we go, a whopping 4 levels I loved in the game that houses 92. How endearing. The worst part about this game is how it absolutely abandons the creativity-filled arenas for core fights that lack any of the same personality from the previous installments, even Project Phantasma. Almost every core is insanely overpowered, either being metaspec or human plus. But that's not my problem. If that was, I wouldn't have enjoyed my Master Arena run. What happens here is that most of these fights are incredibly uninspired gank battles that have no actual difficulty to them outside of overwhelming numbers. I was incredibly exhausted fighting these battles because unlike the rest of the series, where each individual installment took me about a day or 2 to complete, I was stuck on the final few core fights for a whopping 2 weeks. I thought I was going to drop this game. I thought I had enough Another Age for a lifetime. I was struggling to find a reason to even keep pushing myself through the game. Every time I hopped on it, it really felt like dragging my knuckles through glass for the chance of a high five and a hot dog as my reward. I even tried reevaluating if there was anything wrong with my playstyle or setups. Not only that, but I even scoured the internet for meta level setups because I was getting that antsy about seeing the ending. Yeah, I found that despite even in using those setups, I was getting pummeled. I about gave the fuck up because shockingly, I don't play FromSoftware games to get stuck on fights that expect you to metaspec yourself. It is the exact same reason why I find Promised Consort Radahn incredibly annoying when compared to Elden Ring's greater boss roster. I am a sucker for their intense attention to detail, their grim storytelling, and their flavor of customization in combat. I do not see any of that here. I only see a game made of FromSoftware's worst qualities. There is a severe lack of anything I find compelling about video games as an artistic medium here. There are expansions out there that absolutely ask the player for more competence in their playstyle. Hell, I just got done playing Alan Wake's The Signal bonus level, and the way that DLC handles challenge in its sandbox is incredibly compelling because it ties in with the world collapsing over itself. The challenge in Another Age is entirely unbearable because, surprise surprise, the AI can't really handle any sort of line-of-sight break. Cover is king during these fights, and I don't mean swapping from cover to cover, I straight up mean that enemies cannot handle you being above them or behind a small box. When I realized this, these fights immediately became simple, yet bloated and draining cakewalks. These are supposed to be the best of the best Ravens. For a while they seem completely insurmountable, but the game just gives in, collapses on itself, and lets you pummel them to death. Truth be told, the only 2 AC fights I thoroughly enjoyed in this game were the aforementioned Nineball fight and Unfettered, who pushes your aerial combat knowledge to such an extreme unlike the rest of the roster. No amount of Sean Connery could make me enjoy whatever the fuck was happening in that 3 mecha gank fight. Funnily enough, there is one particular moment in the post-game that really got to me because it revisits older content in a much more curious and playful way. Beating the game rewards you with 3 bonus fights. Stinger, Phantasma, and Seraph. The way these fights are rebalanced or redone, their pretty shells, the new moves, the new ways to handle them within your own repertoire of tools, it's an incredibly kind look at the generation before, removed from any sort of canonical pretense. I haven't beaten this incarnation of Seraph yet, but I do have a higher chance of coming back to this fight specifically in the future than I do to simply replay this game in its entirety. Unfortunately, instead of being like this for the majority of its runtime, another age strips back personalization further in an attempt to curb creativity and forces skill ceiling in a gameplay setting that really doesn't warrant it. No, FromSoftware, I don't think seeing a slideshow congratulating me for beating your ultimate challenge was enough. I wanted something more. In trying to show me that things have a hard time changing in society, FromSoftware only made me wish that they had changed their views on Generation 1 as a mythology. How the hell is it that this game ended up being more pretentious and less fun to play than that god-awful Bloober game I ended up playing recently? This is a video game that I can only describe as spiritually skippable, even if I was stubborn on completing it. Would Generation 2 have been more interesting if it didn't tie itself to Generation 1 so deeply? Perhaps. Yet, I think the better question is asking, what would that even look like? Would FromSoftware go back to valuing the bonds they create with their players through their systems, or will it just get more restrictive from here? I hate to end things on such a cynical note, so I hope that there is much more ethereal Generation 1 influence in the series going forward, and not directly ever again. Generation 1 should remain a specter within the series, a blueprint in handling corporate power and the cyclical nature of violence, not a simple object to point at and nihilistically claim with pretense that nothing will ever change, when in fact, humans do have the capacity for change. Bleakness does not beget hope, and the doors can open for change. Thank you deeply for watching.